In 1914, the golden age of polar exploration was drawing to a close. The South Pole had been conquered. The North Pole claimed. Yet, one impossible prize remained, a challenge of sheer, terrifying scale, the first crossing of the Antarctic continent. The man who stepped forward was Sir Ernest Shackleton. Not the fastest, not the most conventionally skilled, but a leader who understood one immutable truth of the ice. Man can be defeated, but the human spirit can never be broken. He placed an advertisement in the London papers, a missive that has become legendary. Men wanted for hazardous journey, small wages, bitter cold, long months of complete darkness, constant danger, safe return doubtful. Honor and recognition in case of success. The sheer audacity attracted a crew of 27. Scientists, seamen, a physicist, a cook, and a doctor, all bound for the whaling station of Grytviken, South Georgia. Their vessel was the Endurance, a three-masted schooner built to withstand the worst of the pack ice. They believed they were sailing toward history. They were, but not the history they imagined. The first year was a triumph of navigation. But in January 1915, they encountered the vast, labyrinthine tentacles of the Weddell Sea. This sea is a grinding mill of ice, a place where millions of tons of frozen water collide, creating pressure ridges the size of hills. On January 19, 1915, at 76 degrees 34 minutes south, the Endurance was nipped. Not a fatal blow, but a simple, sickening realization: she was stuck. The sea had frozen solid around them. Shackleton recorded the latitude with clinical detachment. For 3 months they drifted. They hunted seals and penguins for food and fuel. They played football on the ice floes, a calculated attempt by Shackleton to maintain the illusion of normality and, crucially, to burn off the restless energy of his men. This was the period of testing the human mind. Imagine being surrounded by the exact same white horizon for 9 months. No land, no motion, only the slow, infinitesimal drift of the pack ice. Every day became the same day. Shackleton's key strategy here was forced engagement. He kept the men busy, inventing tasks, rotating duties, making sure no man had too much time to stare into the abyss of his own despair. In September, the Antarctic spring arrived, bringing with it not salvation, but destruction. The enormous ice sheet began to fracture and move. The Endurance, built for pressure, met a force beyond its engineering. A massive pressure ridge formed 20 yards from the ship's port side. The ice acted like a gargantuan vice. It was not a sudden explosion, but a slow, continuous groan of death. The timbers screamed. The hull plates buckled inward. Water burst through the seams. The ship was dying by slow strangulation. On October 27, 1915, Shackleton gave the order to abandon ship. The Endurance was no longer a vessel, it was a ruin. The men salvaged 3 lifeboats, the James Caird, the Dudley Docker, and the Stancomb Wills, along with 1,100 pounds of provisions. Shackleton gathered his men. They watched the ship sink. Then he delivered his most profound order: we must kill the dogs. There were nearly 70 dogs, loyal companions. They were their friends, but they were also a drain on resources. The order was given with a heavy heart, and the task was executed by the expedition's surgeon, Macklin and Frank Wild. This was not cruelty, it was the calculus of survival. Every calorie, every ounce of load had to be justified against the survival of the 28 men. It was the moment they shed their identity as explorers and became survivors. They were now refugees on a piece of frozen ocean. Their destination, Powlett Island, 346 miles away, where a relief hut was rumored to exist. Shackleton tried to march, dragging the lifeboats across the chaotic ice. Was a failure. The labor was immense, the progress negligible, and the strain was immense. The men realized that what was valuable in London, money, titles, was worthless here. What mattered were wool socks, a functioning cooker, and the ability to find a seal. Shackleton focused on the smallest details to keep sanity: singing, reading aloud from an old encyclopedia, and the absolute elimination of class structure. Everyone, from the geologist to the captain, had the same duties. After 2 months of futile marching and realizing the ice was carrying them north, away from land, Shackleton called a halt. They established Patience Camp. They would wait for the ice to break up. This was the true psychological crucible. They drifted for nearly 5 months, from December 1915 to April 1916. The routine was everything: daily prayers, meticulous meal schedules, and the constant search for seals and penguins, the only thing separating them from starvation. This is where the meticulous planning of rations and the psychological games of leadership were crucial. Shackleton would often place himself on the night watch, not because he didn't trust his men, but because he knew it was the time when a man's resolve was most vulnerable. He needed to absorb the fear so the others could sleep. In April 1916, the floe they were camped on began to disintegrate. It split down the middle, a sound like a cannon shot. They quickly launched the 3 lifeboats onto the open, violent sea. The boats were overloaded, undermanned, and totally unfit for the high seas. Their immediate goal was Elephant Island, a grim, forbidding mass of rock and ice, the first dry land they had seen in 497 days. The passage took 7 grueling days. The men were soaked in freezing seawater, suffering from frostbite, thirst, and snow blindness. They had to constantly bail the boats as massive seas crashed over the gunwales. Shackleton kept the 3 boats close, using signaling lamps and horns to prevent them from being separated by the massive swells. This proximity was vital. It maintained the psychological bond of the pack. The constant, physical toil of rowing and bailing suppressed the mental fatigue of fear. On April 14, 1916, they landed on the minuscule, inhospitable spit of rock at Elephant Island. They were alive. They had reached land. But they were 1,000 miles from civilization with 0 chance of being found. This was not salvation. It was merely a temporary staging post for death. Elephant Island offered only a brief reprieve. It was uninhabited, outside any shipping lanes, and perpetually covered in snow and ice. The men were starving, exhausted, and 2 were severely ill. Shackleton knew a ship would never find them. He had to go for help. Take the best of the 3 lifeboats, reinforce it, and sail 800 miles across the notoriously violent Southern Ocean to the whaling stations of South Georgia. It was a journey that had never been successfully attempted in a boat that small. He chose 5 men for the mission: Frank Worsley, captain, navigator; Tom Crean, the reliable giant; Timothy McCarthy, John Vincent, and Henry McNish, the carpenter, whose skills were vital for refitting the boat. McNish, the aging carpenter, had initially questioned an order, nearly leading to a mutiny. Shackleton, with brilliant psychology, forced McNish to be essential by requiring his skill to prepare the lifeboat, ensuring his unwavering loyalty for the critical task. McNish, despite his age and infirmity, worked miracles. 1. They raised the sides of the 22.5-foot lifeboat, covering the entire hull with canvas stretched over makeshift wooden frames, creating a rudimentary, protective deck. 2. The seams were sealed with blood from slaughtered seals mixed with oil paint. The blood was a gruesome, necessary bond. 3. They filled the bottom of the boat with 1,000 pounds of rock for ballast, increasing stability at the cost of being nearly impossible to right if capsized. On April 24, 1916, the James Caird was launched. Shackleton left the remaining 22 men under the command of Frank Wild with one direct order: hold on. I will return. The journey of the James Caird is arguably the greatest feat of small boat navigation in maritime history. For 16 days, 6 men endured an ordeal that transcended human misery. They were hit by a 100-foot wave, a rogue swell described by Worsley as a mountain of water. The wave deluged the boat, nearly sinking them and washing away supplies. The freezing sea water covered them, forming a continuous layer of ice that threatened to capsize the boat. They had to crawl out onto the deck in hurricane-force winds to chip away the ice with their meager tools. Worsley's navigation was superhuman. With a sun sight only occasionally visible through a gap in the storm clouds, often for a fraction of a second, he was able to determine their position. In a small, bucking boat, with frozen hands and a mind clouded by exhaustion, he successfully navigated a 22-foot vessel across 1/6 of the circumference of the globe. After 16 days, as the men were nearing the point of total physical and mental collapse, Worsley shouted, "Land!" South Georgia, the target, was visible through the clearing fog. They had reached South Georgia, but the struggle was not over. Gale-force winds and massive surf prevented them from landing on the civilized, northern side of the island. They were forced to land on the uninhabited, glacier-covered southern coast. The James Caird was abandoned. They had reached land, but between them and the whaling station at Stromness lay 32 miles of uncharted, mountainous, glacier-ridden interior. No one had ever crossed it. It was 10,000 feet high, a maze of unmapped crevasses and ice waterfalls. Shackleton, Worsley, and Crean left the 3 weakest men behind and began the final desperate 36-hour trek. They took only a coil of rope and a carpenter's adze. They threw caution to the wind, glissading down steep, unknown glaciers, navigating by guess and by God. At 6:30 a.m. on May 20, 1916, after 36 hours of continuous travel, exhausted and looking like cavemen, they heard it. the sound of the Stromness whaling station steam whistle, calling the men to work. It was the sound of humanity, of life, after 2 years of complete silence. Shackleton, Crean, and Worsley walked into the Stromness station. The foreman, an old acquaintance, was utterly shocked. They were unrecognizable. Shackleton's first and only demand was a ship to rescue the remaining men. It took Shackleton 4 agonizing months and 4 different ships, battling the persistent pack ice, to reach Elephant Island. Each failed attempt drove him to the brink. On August 30, 1916, aboard the Chilean steamer Yelcho, Shackleton approached Elephant Island. He counted the 22 men huddled under the makeshift shelter. They had survived 4 months on a rock in an Antarctic winter, living off blubber and hope. Shackleton stood on the deck and shouted the greatest sentence of his life, "Are you all well?" The men erupted. They were thin, frostbitten, and filthy, but they were all there. Every single one. The Imperial Trans-Antarctic Expedition was a failure as an expedition. Shackleton never crossed the continent. But as a testament to leadership, endurance, and the unyielding spirit of man, it was the greatest success in the history of survival. Shackleton lost his ship. He lost his mission. But he accomplished the one feat that mattered more than all the geographic poles in the world. He lost not a single man. He wrote later, "We had for guide the stars and for food the sea. But our true compass was loyalty, and our only supply was hope." The tale of the Endurance is not a story about ice. It's a story about leadership under absolute duress. It's the ultimate lesson that when the world is stripped away, when you are left with nothing but the clothes on your back and the people around you, the only currency that matters is courage and the promise of return. If the story of Shackleton's impossible leadership has changed your understanding of what human beings can endure, hit the like button. Subscribe to the channel for more true survival sagas, stories that prove the impossible is simply the next challenge. Share this video with someone who needs a reminder of what true, unwavering leadership looks like. We'll see you in the next one.